Good evening, guys. We'll get right on it. We'll get to the armor of God first. Okay, the armor of God. It is in Ephesians 6, but you can look it up on any search engine. The armor of God. I put on and stand firm with the belt of truth buckled around my waist. I'm safe and secure with the breastplate of righteousness, guarding my heart from evil, helping me live a life that honors you. I diligently put on the gospel shoes of peace, willing to go wherever you ask of me. I take and stand behind the shield of faith, protected against Satan's fiery darts of doubt, fear, lies, and deceit. Now on my head I place the helmet of salvation, keeping my mind on you. I grab hold in my hand of the sword of the Spirit, the word of God, sharp and true. I'm prepared to live today in spiritual victory in Jesus' name. Amen, folks. Amen. Hi, Jane. Tonight we're doing the Women of the Bible. We're going to be doing Mary and the Sword of Sorrows, Mary Magdalene and the Questioning Heart, and Michael the Dancing King. So let's get going. Let's hope some more people pop in. Mary and the Sword of Sorrows. This is going to be a long night, thought Jesus' mother, the widow Mary, settling herself more comfortably in bed in the room provided for her by Joseph of Arimathea. She was sitting up, leaning against her cushions and looking up at the stars through the open window. The brilliant full moon, signaling the start of Passover, had just begun to move into the frame of the window formed, and it seemed to her that she had been sitting there for hours and hours. No, she corrected herself. Only since Shabbos dinner ended and the girls helped me get to bed, and that can't be more than an hour, maybe two. She and the other disciples on Calvary had gone back with Joseph to his house at his insistence. Once the body of Jesus had been placed in Joseph's new tomb on Friday, stay with me through the Sabbath, he had begged them. I really need you. I don't think I can bear it alone. Neither could we, she thought now. Yesterday and today have been the worst days of my life. I couldn't have stood either one alone, and I don't think anyone else could have either. Odd, though, how the core of his closest friends, scattered during the horrors of yesterday, had gathered here, uninvited, by ones and twos as the Sabbath day had worn its way to sunset. Or maybe not odd at all. They had all loved him, had become his friends, really closer than family. With him gone, they had to cling together or be entirely lost. They were all here now, she thought, except for Judas Iscariot, who had first betrayed him by selling him to the priest, and then had refused even to look for his forgiveness. He had unalived himself, they've told her. So Judas is buried in the potter's field, and my Jesus is buried in Joseph's tomb, and neither rage nor tears will bring either of them back to life or give either of them another chance. She heaved a sigh, blending pain and impatience. Then, lightly pounding her right fist into her left palm, she said under her breath, Enough, Mary, enough. You were warned about this when Jesus was 40 days old. Simeon, standing right there in the temple precincts, putting him back in your arms, told you a sword would pierce your spirit, and it has many times over. Sorry, folks. But he never said you had to keep turning it in the wound. Now just stop it. Think of something else. Mary sighed and sat very still, focusing all her attention on the stars. She slowly felt herself begin to calm. She slipped through her mind like beads on a string, contemplating all the times that Simeon's sword, as she thought of it, had made its mark in her spirit. She saw again that day in the temple when she and Joseph had brought the infant to present him to God as firstborn and redeem him according to the law. She could still feel the eyes of the ancient Simeon boring right into her soul as he said to her, He is destined for the fall and for the rising of many in Israel, destined to be a sign that is rejected, and a sword will pierce your own soul too, so that the secret thoughts of many may be laid bare. And you can find that in Luke 2, verses 34 and 35, folks. She had clutched her baby to her then. She remembered vowing to protect him from everything, all the while knowing she could not, any more than she had been able to save him from the necessary pain of his circumcision. Though she had seemed to feel the swift cut in her own flesh, and seeing his blood had seemed to bleed with him, she had known then that each failure would pierce her through and through as that one had. The next thrust of Simeon's sword had come that same night. The hideous terror that had accompanied their pell-mell escape into Egypt by darkness, fleeing Herod's soldiers to save the child's life. Their few possessions bundled onto the donkey behind her. Jesus asleep in her arms, they had fled. Joseph, dear Joseph, urged the donkey to keep up the quick pace he had set. Their flight had been accompanied, for her at least, by visions of blood and body parts and the huge soldiers smashing Jesus on the rocks. Those visions had persisted even after they were safe in Egypt in a kinsman's house, well out of range of Herod's fury, and with the Magi's gold to see them through until Joseph could get work. What if, she kept fretting, hearing the screams and feeling the pain, awake and asleep for weeks. It was the helplessness, the hopelessness, and the fear that no matter what we did, we'd fail and he'd die, that gave the sword its edge that time, she saw now. That was the first time I had to face a world where God might lose. And that's how it seemed, even though I knew better, she shivered. But bad as that had been, it was nothing to the time they had lost him in the temple. That's when I learned the next lesson of the sword, she mused, that I couldn't control his choices even to keep him safe. I finally saw that I had to let him go, and that I wouldn't necessarily know where he was or what was happening to him. But it took a good while, and oh, how that seeing hurt. Stretching, she changed position, trying to find a more comfortable way to settle herself. And I thought that was the end of Simeon's sword, she remembered. I should have known better. I should have known. There had been no hint, though, that she had been wrong. Their life in Nazareth after that had been peaceful, a quiet time when they had grown closer to each other, when they had enjoyed the work they did for each other and for their neighbors. Then Joseph had died. Somehow she had never thought of this serious, gentle man with his enduring strength, absolute steadiness, and delightful sense of fun. This husband of hers, this other half of herself, really, as not being there, as dying and leaving her essentially alone in the ways that most mattered. And I didn't think, she remembered, not even once, of Simeon's sword. I wish I had. It all might have been easier. Still, though, they had gone on, she and Jesus, and not much had really changed. She began to relax then, to think that the work of the sword must be over. After all, she had nothing left to lose. Thinking of that time now, Mary smiled and shook her head. She should have known. Simeon's sword had only just begun its work. It was the wedding at Cana, innocent, wonderful feast that it was, that had given the sword a place to begin in its next dismantling of her life and her preconceptions. It wasn't so much that the word of what he'd done had spread so quickly, or even the people had started to flock to him as he began to preach the kingdom of God as now at hand. That had been fine. She had seen him, had heard him preach from time to time, and had been impressed. He was good. His father would be pleased that she could have lived with cheerfully. It was what had so unexpectedly come with that change that had cut her to the heart. She had gone to visit with him when he was teaching nearby, taking along some of the family. He'd been inside a house when she got there, and one of the relatives, who was less patient than a 2-year-old, bless his heart, she remembered, sent in that dreadful message saying I was there and he should come out to see us. She shook her head. The message had interrupted the lesson he was teaching to the people who had gathered around him to learn about God, and he had not, she imagined, had been pleased. He covered it well, of course, even used it to make another point for them all. Who is my mother? Who are my brothers and sisters? He had asked from inside the house, but pitching his voice so that everyone in the crowd outside, herself and the family included, could hear him. The one, the one who does the will of my Father is mother and brother and sister to me. She had gasped in shock. It had felt like a total rejection of her being, of all that they had shared, and of his whole life with her. A rejection of all the love she and Joseph, while he was alive, had poured out on him. It seemed to deny value to everything she had ever done for him, given him, taught him, suffered for him, everything. Her sense of loss was overwhelming. Jesus had come out after that, of course, and spoken lovingly to her, but they both knew what he had meant and what he had done. He had, once and for all time, closed the door of the life they had shared in their home, just the three, and now just the two of them, and sealed it with a stone as formidable as the one they had used today to seal his tomb. And she had been inside. She felt the darkness and the weight of that stone still. She had known at that moment that the part of her had died and that it could never come back to life. How wrong she was. A good deal later, after the numbness had worn off and the pain had been a custom and tolerated part of her, residing in the background but never absent, she had begun to understand what Simeon's sword wielded by Jesus had been up to that day. He had not been casting her off, nor refusing her love. What he had been saying to his followers and to her on another level was that it was following the Father that mattered, and that he meant to include in his family anyone who would do so. Really, she reflected now, he had opened the door to his family, not closed it. He had rolled back that stone she had been thinking of as permanently sealing her inside, what had been their life, leaving her in the dark. He had made everyone welcome who wanted to come in, be one with him by loving and obeying his Father. It had been a good thing to do, essentially, really, and she was richer for it. But at the time, all she could feel was Simeon's blade at work, cutting the ties of love and blood that had sustained her, that unless she wanted to be sealed in her past with him, with only memory to light the dark, had left her with really only one way of going on. She'd taken that way. She wanted to be a part of his present life of mission with all her heart. So she had looked around to find the people who had gravitated toward him. Then, first tentatively, then eagerly, she had seconded the welcome to his family that he had extended them. And gradually and carefully, she had begun to learn how to make them a home too. On the surface, she had become just one of the band of women who ministered to him, but they all, including herself, knew better. So did the men who became his disciples. She was the heart of the group. They welcomed her lovingly, seemed anxious to spend time with her, and leaned on her strength and peace. She had responded to them and grown glad at the richness of this new and most unexpected life. But the pain, Simeon's sword, she knew now, had never entirely faded. And then come yesterday, with that sword dealing pain so close to death that still being alive afterwards seemed hardly a mercy. She shuddered now, remembering not just what she had seen and felt and smelled, but what she had not, for they had told her everything, had seemed need to, as if telling her were all that could make it bearable, that being alone with all that pain would have been too much. And she knew about the night they had all spent in the Garden of Olives. It was John who had begun, with Peter and James filling in what they remembered. In their telling, it was as though she had been there with them through their eyes. She had seen him, facing the stark reality of his coming death, coming in a matter of hours. His terror matched only by his courage and his absolute trust in his Father. She saw his sweat pouring down like blood, praying 3 times, they said, that the cup, now almost at his lips, might somehow not have to be drunk. She heard him as they had, voice breaking with unshed tears, telling his Father that if the cup had to be drunk, he would drink it, and he meant it. It was his Father that mattered, and his Father's will alone that he would do. They had slept, they had confessed to her, couldn't seem to stay awake. His pain had been so intense, they couldn't have been able to bear it, and they couldn't help him. So we even failed him there, Peter had declared, still ravaged with grief over his own betrayal of the one he had believed he loved more than his life. His failure had come later, after Judas had led the armed group, both the temple guards and a small detachment of Roman soldiers, into the garden and greeted Jesus with a kiss. That was the sign he had told them that would mark the man he was betraying, the one the priest had sent them to capture. Peter had stayed at first, had even, in trying to cleave the man in two, chopped off the ear of the high priest's servant, Malchus, with the sword he had brought. And he healed him. Jesus picked up the ear and put it right back where it belonged, and there it stayed, said Levi, who'd known the man, as he did most of the temple servants from his own days at his post as a tax collector for the Romans. But they had all fled from the garden, they told her. Once he had told his captors to let them go if he was the only one they came for. No one wanted to be there if the soldiers changed their minds. Poor Mark had even left his outer garments in their hands, fleeing stark naked into the night. Once the guard had hauled Jesus off to the high priest's house, and it was plain that they weren't going to be pursued and taken with him, they began to make their way back to him. John had been able to get into the palace itself, and spotting Peter following along, had gotten him into the courtyard. They had brought Jesus to Ananias first. That's when the guard hit him, John had told her, looking sick. And all he'd done was tell Ananias to ask the people who heard him if Ananias wanted to know what he had said. And then he had told her about the trial Caiaphas and his father-in-law Annas had conducted before the Sanhedrin. It had been a farce with no witnesses to the charges they were trying to bring, but paid ones, and they had not been able to agree. It was only when they put him on oath to say whether or not he were the Messiah, and he told them they'd see him coming from the heavens, sitting at God's right hand, that they'd been able to move. Blasphemy, of course, said John. That was the charge, and they made it with bells on, and then they attacked him, and the guards joined in. They beat him, they spit on him, they blindfolded him and punched him, telling him to prophesy who had hit him. But Peter had interrupted. It was while all that was going on that I failed him. They asked me 3 times while I was out in that courtyard if I was one of his men, and I said I wasn't, said I didn't even know him. I swore it, and then I heard the cock crow. It was the second crowing, the first just before dawn. And that's when I realized he knew I would deny him, even told me when and how many times. And then They had his hands tied, and they were marching him out to take him to Pilate. And they brought him right past me. I looked at him, and he looked back at me, right into my eyes. He wasn't angry the way I would have been, or disgusted with me. I certainly was. He just looked so sad. It broke my heart. The tears had come again. Mary thought maybe there wouldn't be enough of them ever to wipe out that memory for Peter. She hoped there would be someday. She certainly didn't blame the burly fisherman, didn't hold his failure against him, and she knew Jesus wouldn't have, she remembered, wincing. Anyway, John had gone on. At dawn, they marched him out to take him to Pilate so they could have him unalived. The priest had made Pilate come out to them, John told her, so they'd be clean and would be able to celebrate the Passover. When Pilate came out, they accused Jesus of stirring up rebellion, of telling people not to pay taxes to Caesar, and of claiming to be the anointed one, a king, they said. When Pilate, who knew a jealous charge when he had heard one, told them they had no case, they started to scream. This man had spreading his poison in Galilee, and now it was all over Judea. Well, said John, Pilate just grabbed at Galilee because that's Herod's jurisdiction. He could send Jesus to Herod and let him deal with these people and their charges. So he did. Herod, she exclaimed, that filthy man. I know, John said, but at the time I was almost relieved. I didn't think Herod could give out a death sentence, which is what the elders and priests were determined to have. So I thought Jesus might have a chance. Pilate had already refused the case, so if Herod dismissed the charges, they'd have lost. Too bad that didn't work out that way, Andrew had said. Don't tell me Herod actually can hand out death sentences, Mary exclaimed. Well, he killed John the Baptizer, one of the women said. Why couldn't he? John was a special case, said Thomas. He had been taken into custody, but he was never tried. It was personal, and that's how he was killed. So Herod could keep his word to glancing at Mary, he blushed. In any case, John picked up the story. Herod couldn't get a word out of Jesus, couldn't get him to do any tricks, miracles, and I think that's what he was looking for. The priests were screeching away, trying to convince him that Jesus was a criminal who needed to die, but Herod just turned them out. I guess Herod was getting bored. He liked some excitement, so he and his guards started making fun of Jesus, dressing him up in lavish clothes, and then sent him back to Pilate to deal with. Pilate had not been pleased. The priest had gotten their second wind and recruited a mob they could use to scream and rant and threaten riot. They'd come back with their prisoner, baying for blood, and the mob joined in. Pilate had questioned Jesus at length and evidently come away convinced that he was innocent and that his accusers were trying to use Rome to eliminate this unfortunate rival for their power. So he'd been determined to free Jesus somehow, or so it seems, said John. But he reckoned without persistence and wiles of the priest who'd used their mob to good effect. Pilate had begun by saying there was no case against Jesus. Then he offered to release him as the Passover prisoner, gave them a choice of Jesus or Barabbas, a murderer. He'd been trying to appeal to the crowd, for he knew most of the people in Jerusalem who heard of Jesus loved him. I think, said John, he hoped they'd turn against the priest and demand Jesus to be the one released.
Your camera.
That didn't really need to be fixed, because now you're on my boobs.
No. No, I'm not. There. I had to fix it.
Okay.
Hi, everybody.
My husband decided to fix my camera again. All right. It hadn't worked. The priest-led portion of the mob had screamed for Barabbas and kept on screaming until Pilate began to get nervous. It looked as though a riot would break out any minute, and that would mean trouble, not only for Jerusalem, but also for him with Rome. So he temporized. he found no case, he said so. He'd simply scourge him and set him free. What was he going to scourge him for if he was innocent? Mary had demanded, as if John had been Pilate. That's the most utter nonsense I had ever heard. John had shaken his head. I know, he said. It's criminal. I think he thought he could have pleased the priest by punishing Jesus severely, even though he said there was no cause, out loud and in public. And the priest knew perfectly well that there wasn't. Like a bribe, asked Philip. So they'd go away happy, or just go away. I think so, said John, because of what he did afterwards. For the scourging, the soldiers had taken Jesus into the praetorium, to the punishment area, and had gathered the whole court. They stripped him, scourged him until there wasn't an unbroken bit of skin on him, and blood covered him from head to foot. Then they began to make fun of him. They dressed him in a purple robe, set him down, pushed onto his head a crown of woven thorns, stuck a reed in his hand, and then made their obeisance, greeting him as King of the Jews with raucous laughter. They spat on him, beaten him over the head with the reed, slapped him in the face, done everything they could think of to degrade him. It was after that Pilate had brought him before the crowd. He wanted them to look at Jesus. He thought the ones who believed the priest and were afraid would see that he was no threat. If he had ever been one, would see that the charges had to be false. He thought the rest of the people, the majority he supposed, would be shocked and furious at what he had suffered and would rise up and demand that he be released. None of that happened. It was the priests and elders, John explained. They worked up their people in the crowd to such a pitch they'd scream for no reason. And the minute Jesus appeared, the priests started to chant, crucify him, and wouldn't let up. Pilate screamed over the noise that the priests should crucify Jesus themselves because he wasn't going to. But they turned it around. They told him if he freed a man who claimed to be king, he wasn't serving Caesar. And then they said that Jesus certainly wasn't their king, that their only king was Caesar. Can you imagine? Religious leaders in Israel saying Caesar was their king, their only king. I looked over my shoulder to see if the temple was still standing. Anyway, that did it. Pilate caved and ordered Jesus to be taken out and crucified. He didn't like that, but he did it. And that was when you came to get me, Mary had asked. Exactly, said John. I waited until then, hoping he'd be freed, and I could bring him back with me, but that did not happen. I'm glad you came, she said. I know you'd want to be there to do whatever you could, and if you couldn't do anything, at least you'd want to stay with him as long as they let you, John had answered simply. I thank you for that, she said, and for staying with me all the way. I don't know how I've managed without you in all that crush. It had been dreadful. Thinking about it now, she got up, restless, and walked to the window for a breath of air. The moon had moved. It was almost centered in the window, and it seemed to have grown smaller, gotten further away. The day seemed to be trying to do the same thing, but it was not succeeding. Mary sat on the bench beside the window and leaned back against the wall, still gazing at the sky. She knew she was going to have to relive the day. Just after the third hour, the thundering at the door began. Mary, working at her loom, had gone quickly to the window to look. It was John. She ran to let him in, her heart thudding. Something terrible must have happened, for the usually voluble young man was absolutely silent and white as her sheets. What is it? She asked, concerned. John, tell me what's wrong. Is it Jesus? They've arrested him, John said woodenly. Who has? She demanded. John, who has arrested Jesus? Where is he? Answering her last question first, John said, on his way to Golgotha to be crucified. It was the high priest first. They sent the temple guard with some Roman soldiers to the garden to get him. They put him on trial, condemned him for blasphemy. then took him to the Romans so they could execute him. And they managed to get Pilate to pass sentence. Right now, he should be making his way through the city, carrying his cross. The bald recital of the horrors was somehow steadying, she found. It left her with only the practicalities to deal with. What route will they take? She asked. The usual one, he said. Take me there, she demanded. They moved quickly, using byways and shortcuts that had gotten them around the jams of pilgrims enjoying the capital during the festival, and were able to settle themselves in a secure corner before the first of the soldiers appeared, clearing the way for the following procession. Catching sight of Jesus, at last, Mary drew a deep breath. This was worse than anything she had imagined. Blood was crusted on him everywhere, even on his outer garments were rusty brown with it, and red blood still oozed around the thorns pressed into his head. Evidently he had fallen, for mud mixed with the blood all down the front of his clothes, and he limped, though that was hard to tell, as he also staggered with weakness under the weight of the cross he was carrying. She raised one hand to him as he came abreast of the spot where she and John stood, almost reaching out to stop him. Catching the gesture, he turned and saw her. An odd expression came over his battered, bloody face, as if he wanted to smile at her, and at the same time weep in her arms like a hurt child. She looked all her love at him, but did not move toward him, knowing that would shatter his control. He gave her a tiny nod of relief and thanks. He knew she was there, that she would always be. That was all that really mattered to both of them, she knew. Mary stepped back against the wall and felt John's arm around her, gripping her firmly, supporting her while he awaited her decision about what they would do next. Can we get to the top of the hill before they do? She asked. If we go the long way around, he said. Sounds foolish, I know, but it'll work. If you want to, we can. I do, she said decisively. More than anything in the world. She stopped, and then she added, and like you, least of all. He gave what was almost the start of a laugh and said, right, up we go then. The moon had been moving steadily, she noticed, standing and straightening her back. Now it was almost to the edge of the window frame. When it had gone, she knew the sky would be gray and the new day would announce itself. That bench is hard, she thought with a grimace. Seizing on the distraction, she looked around the room, then took a pillow from the bed and spent some time getting it on the bench to her satisfaction. Settling back down with a sigh, she went on with her agonizing retracing of the day. The crucifixion itself had been indescribably horrible. Mary knew she had never seen anything like it, nor come near imagining it. Though she'd known that the Romans crucified their criminals from time to time, she knew her own name. It had been bad enough watching the two who were crucified with him. Their screams as the nails plunged to the hands and feet, and the crossbeams settled into the uprights were beyond bearing. But watching Jesus, her baby boy, her dearest child, endure the same thing, that was in another world of pain she hadn't known existed until it swallowed her. She hadn't thought about Simeon's sword then. She hadn't had breath or attention to spare for herself. She had just suffered with him, watching him unable to reduce the pain by so much as a fingernail's thickness. It had seemed this pain would never end and that nothing could be worse. Wrong again, she thought, on two counts. That pain did end when he died, and what followed was worse. Worse even than hearing him give her away to John as his mother, with Salome, his own mother, standing right there, and give John to her as her son, when the only son she wanted was himself, hanging on that cross. That pain had been bad enough. It had been a pinprick compared to the rest, and she knew so, even at the time, but somehow it had seemed worse than all the rest, for it was her very self that he was putting from him, the self she had given him totally with her consent to his birth, and now she had nothing left, nothing at all. A tear had slid down her cheek, And for that moment, all the desolation of the abandoned world was hers alone. Her mind had understood it. Even then, of course, it was simple. He loved her and wanted her taken care of. And John was his dearest friend. So John was the only one he'd really trust to take care of her. The understanding had helped, though it had little effect on what she was feeling: bitterness, the pain of being put aside, rejection. But she'd been able to see that as a ploy of the evil one and thrust it aside to concentrate on being with her beloved son in his agony and dying. She leaned on John, and the young man had seemed glad of it. She noticed with a corner of her attention, surprised. With John, she watched him die, breath by breath, the pain growing worse for him, not better. She died with him as he came to feel that even God, his Father, had abandoned him, and her heart had supported him as he continued to trust the love he knew was there, hidden in the depth he was diving. Finally, it had ended. It was in the silence that followed his last shuddering breath that she begun to breathe easily again. The ease had ended, and this new state had announced itself when they'd taken him down from the cross. Good Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus, and laid him in her arms until they could get the linens spread with spices and move his body to its grave clothes. Then she had felt opening with her the same void she had watched him enter, and perhaps had helped him struggle through: abandonment, absence, loss of meaning, all of these and more and less. How could she survive this death? Why couldn't she have died with him? I am utterly alone. I am useless, she said aloud now, tasting the words, weighing them for truth. She found them false. She wasn't alone, had never been. God lived in her, as he had always done, and loved her. And Jesus, who almost with his last breath had stripped himself of his only remaining comfort, herself, the very last of his private life on earth, to give her to John, had also given her, she supposed, to the whole band of his followers, to mother them all. They needed her. He needed her to do this for him. And that was why she hadn't died, couldn't have, though how she was going to learn how to feel again, she did not know. Nor did she think, really, that she could go on without him. She shook herself. Simeon's sword again, she said. But what's the point of this wound if there's no me left after it's done its work? And then finally she understood all of it. Her me was still there, stronger than ever. Each sword thrust that had seemed to separate her from him had actually drawn them closer, made them one on a deeper level. And this one will too, she said, if I will have it so, and I will. Still gazing out the window, she saw the first hint of gray light in the horizon and heard movements below her. The girls must be getting ready to go out to the tomb to give his body a proper burial. Last night she had given them the Magi's frankincense and myrrh, saved all these years to use with what they had, for she knew their task was beyond her. He's in the tomb, she said now. That part is over. Now we have to learn together to live his way without him. We cannot go back. We have to find a way to go forward. And we will. We will. As for the sword, she supposed its work in her would end only with her own life. And that was all right. Who could argue with the Father's plan? Watching the backs of the women receding as they walked the road to the tomb, she felt a sudden stir of hope rise in the center of her being, like the uncurling green of the first leaf to break the dead bark in spring, signaling again the triumph of life over winter's death. I wonder, she whispered, hardly daring to breathe the thought. I wonder, he did say, destroy this temple, and I will raise it up in 3 days. John 2, verse 19. This is the third day. I wonder. And you can find all this stuff, folks, in Matthew 1, verse 16, 18 through 25, chapter 2, verses 10 and 11, chapter 12, verses 46 through 50, chapter 13, verses 53 through 58. You can find it in Mark 3, verses 31 through 35, chapter 6 of Mark, verses 1 through 6. You can find it in Luke 1, verses 26 through 56, Luke 2, verses 1 through 52, Luke 4, chapter 4, verses 16 through 30, Luke chapter 8, verses 19 through 21, and chapter 11 of Luke, verses 28, 27, and 28. Then in John 2, verses 1 through 12, John 6, verse 42, John 19, verses 25 through 27, then in Acts 1, verse 14, Galatians 4, verse 4, and then you see Mary, the mother of Jesus, Son of God. See Mary and the mothering of God, and Mary and the quiet time between. And now we're going to go on to Mary Magdalene. This probably will be the last one, folks, because it is a long one. But Mary Magdalene and the questioning heart. For the third time that early morning, Mary Magdalene made her way down the road that led from Joseph of Arimathea's house to his new tomb. 2 days ago, they had laid there the body of Jesus, their master, teacher, and very center of their collective and individual lives, of her life anyway, that she was sure of. Looking ahead, she could just see the puff of dust Simon, Peter, and John, Zebedee's son, had left in their headlong rush to the tomb to verify with their own eyes the news she had run so fast and so distractedly to bring to them. She herself was walking slowly, still holding herself together, so she could do this one last thing for him, bury his body properly. But now there was this complication, and she did not know how long her enforced calm would last. Complication, well, that was a kind word for it. They'd gone to the tomb together, she and some of the women, carrying fresh linens and spices. She wrapped the Magi's gifts, the jars of frankincense and myrrh his mother had given her to use in linen, then leather, and tucked them carefully into her sash. And then the tomb was wide open. The rock door rolled to one side and no body inside. Just the grave clothes, empty, no one around. That's what they had seen, the three of them, when they'd gotten to the tomb at the break of day. There was the complication. That's what she had told the disciples, tears streaming unheeded down her dusty face and gasping for breath not 5 minutes ago. It simply could not be true. It was not. Could not be possible, or she felt her control lurch dangerously. I can't fall apart now, she insisted to herself. I have to find his body. I have to use this frankincense and this myrrh on him and bury him properly. His body has to be there, has to be somewhere, because if he isn't, and she felt horror wash over her. The ground opened before her feet and herself began to fall and fall and fall. She stopped in the road and held perfectly still. Mary of Magdala, she addressed herself firmly. Stop this. You are looking through the eyes of these seven devils he drove out of you. And if you keep on, they will bind you as they did before. Blind you and bind you as they did before. You've been healed. They're gone. But if you let them, they can come back as he warned you. Hush now. Remember him living. Remember how he healed you and how that felt and how wonderful life has been since. Up until Friday, her listening self interrupted bitterly, and the ground began to open again. Stop, she said steadily. Just remember the healing and let your feet keep on walking. Trust in him. He will not abandon you. He will be found. When has he ever failed anyone? Never, her rebellious, terrified self admitted, and obediently she began to remember. It had been 2 years ago. She had been suffering for ages, it seemed. Not really ill, but in a misery for which there had been no visible cause, having no reason to want to go on living, and no real justification for not embracing the good life she had come to. Her widowed father, who had found her a good husband, had died contented after a long life. She had mourned him, but with little sense of loss, for they had never been close. She had been his only heir and found surprised she was now wealthy. Then her husband, a wealthy widower nearer her father's age than her own, had also died. He had been kind to her and they were good companions, but he had never really engaged her heart, so she felt her loss as a gentle regret rather than a heart-tearing grief. They had no children, and the rest of his family had died before him, so she was again the only heir. That left her very rich indeed, and independent, in full control of her fortune and her own destiny. Women who knew her had told her frankly they envied her, and then returned to lives that seemed to her to be full to overflowing with people and responsibilities and meaningful things that only they could do. But there had been nothing in the world that she had absolutely had to do, and there had not been a single soul who really depended on her just to be. She had seemed herself to be living in a thick, clammy fog that kept her from touching or being touched by anyone or feeling anything. That fog had made the once solid world a place of dim, fearsome shadows, and the ground under her feet a treacherous bog that might open and swallow her at any moment. Got to keep the throat good. Still a little sick, but not by much. That had been the start of it, and the things had gotten worse. There were the symptoms of illness that no cause any doctor could find, the headaches, the miseries of bowel and stomach, the sudden lancing pains in every muscle that put her to bed, where she could not remain, for even her skin seemed to hurt, the sudden breathlessness when her heart would pound too much fast. She would pour sweat, her vision would dim, and the room would spin. There were dreams when she slept, which were very bad, and the dreams or some odd state when she was awake, yet not awake, which were worse, for in them she heard voices and saw things that she knew that weren't there. And there had been, under it all, waking and sleeping, a leaden sense of hopelessness, helplessness, and utter aloneness, and always lurking unseen, just around the next corner, an absolute nameless terror into which she would fall and fall and fall. How long she had gone on this way, gradually worsening, she did not know. During that period, things had seemed to her disordered spirit always to have been this way, yet she knew there had been a time when she had been quite well, happy even, though that seemed sometimes to have been another person entirely, a person she could not find and could never be again. So in desperation, she had kept on with her daily routine, seeing no sense in it, but feeling that somehow it kept her safe from both the terrors and from dissolution. That was when she had come across the Master. She had been passing by as he was preaching, hearing his voice as a background for her thoughts, and suddenly she had come to a dead halt, turned toward him and listened with all her being. His words had cut through the thick fog she had been living in, and she saw the sun, the sky, the people, smelled the grass everyone was trampling. As real again, she felt alive. Then suddenly, in excruciating pain that threatened to tear her body apart, waves of terror and hopelessness swept over her, and she felt the sunlight fading, and the sights and odors, sounds and feelings dimming out. Though she was not faint, she had felt then as though she would die, and had known with certainty that there was not one single thing she could do about it. Yet with a dim surprise she had found herself pressing steadily forward toward the center of the crowd to where he was. She had not really thought he could do anything for her, did not think anyone could, but her feet had stubbornly carried her forward anyway. Eventually she reached him, stood before him, her gaze devouring him, pain and nameless, helpless longing flooding out of her like a fountain. She had said nothing. There was nothing to say. Suddenly he had looked directly at her, then into her eyes, then straight into the depths of her being, and the world around them vanished. She had held her breath, her life in her eyes, her need crying out through her silence, and waited. Still holding her gaze in his, he had spoken 7 times, not to her, but to each of the forces that held her captive, the dark powers that had refused to let her live for so long. He spoke with such authority that each of the 7 was torn out by the roots, dismissed forever, and she was whole, herself again. The tears that had come as she had stood there, drowning in his, washed her clean and completed the restoration his words had commanded and effected in her. She could not remember saying thank you, even, but that hadn't mattered. He knew, and when he smiled at her, everything, and I mean everything, was all right. Leaning on that smile, Mary smiled herself. How wonderful he is, she thought, and opened her eyes to see his ravaged tomb gaping open to the sun, empty forever. The horrors of Friday and the miseries of yesterday, compounded by the senseless despoiling of his grave and the theft of his body, crashed down on her, and she began to weep as she felt her heart break again. She continued walking to the open tomb, and then stopped and entered through her tears. She gazed, hoping against hope, at the place where his body had been. Nothing, just as before. Only empty grave clothes. Then the something different she had seen and not seen demanded attention. She raised her eyes and saw 2 blurred figures, dressed in white, sitting, one at the place where the head of his body had been, the other where his feet had rested. She opened her mouth to speak, but they forestalled her. "Woman," they asked, "why are you crying?" "Because they have taken away the body of my Lord, and I don't know where they've put him," she responded, voice thick with grief, shoulders sagging. She turned around to leave the tomb and saw the gardener standing in the open entry. At last, someone who might know something, someone who could help her. She took a step toward him. He spoke first. "Woman," he asked gently, "why are you crying?" "Oh, sir," she exclaimed, energized, "if you have carried him off, tell me where you have put him, and I will take him away." Her hands gripped each other tightly, pressing against the jars of frankincense and myrrh. She held her breath and fastened her gaze on him, willing him to tell her what she needed to know. The gardener smiled quietly, eyes somewhat moist. "Mary," he said, extending his hands to her. She caught her breath at the sound of her own name in his mouth, and suddenly everything changed. Not the gardener, Jesus, alive, calling her name. Caught between tears and laughter, she flung herself at him, crying, "Rabboni!" That's in John 20, verse 16. She gripped him in a fierce hug that made his ribs creak and winded him. He wept and laughed with her, and then, easing her grip, said, "You don't need to hang on to me so tightly. I haven't ascended to my Father in heaven yet." She shook her head, laughed, and released him, but kept tight hold of his hands. There was so much she wanted to say, so much she wanted to learn, but all she could do was devour him with her eyes and laugh through her tears. He smiled back, gave her hands a squeeze, and said, in the tone he always used when he wanted a special favor, "Go to my brothers. Tell them for me, I am going to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." That's in John 20, verse 17, folks. He did not add, "Will you do that for me?" He did not have to. Giving him a smile that put the rising sun to shame, Mary of Magdala, restored to her own life by something she could do for him, returned the pressure of his hands clasping hers, ducked her head to get out of the tomb, kilted up her skirts, and ran for Joseph's house, her feet pounding out the rhythm of her joy-filled heart. Alive again, he is alive again. And you can find that in Matthew 27, verses 55 and 56 and 51. You can find it also in Matthew 28, verses 1 through 10. Then you can find it in Mark 15, verses 40 and 41 and 47. You can find it in Mark 16, 1 through 11 verses. Then you can find it in Luke 8, verses 2 and 3. And then you can find it in Luke 23, verse 49, then 55 and 56. And you can find it in Luke 24, verses 1 through 11. Then in John, chapter 19, verse 25. Chapter 20 of John, verses 1 through 18. Then see Mary Magdalene. See also Mary, wife of Clopas, Salome, wife of Zebedee, Joanna, Susanna, Mary, sister of Martha, sinful woman who anointed Jesus' feet, ministering women of Jesus the apostle. And I was going to do Michael the King, but I see we got like 5 minutes. And I don't know, it's like 3 pages. I might just do it. Michael and the Dancing King. David, he might have been king in Israel and favorite of the Lord God and of every man, woman, and child in the nation. But to me, on that day, he danced before the ark of God. He was nothing at all. Oh, I had loved him. I was besotted with him when I was a girl, to tell the truth. My father was very pleased that, though I didn't know it, you see, he hoped to use me to trap David and destroy him. He saw David as a threat. Even then, though all I saw was this gorgeous shepherd who played the harp like an angel, my, how I wanted him for my own. Until that day of the dance, I never once thought of what it would be like to be married to a man for whom God really was all in all. And so it was arranged. David really didn't believe my father wanted him for a son-in-law. He knew there was no political advantage in it, and he knew I was way out of his class by birth and by wealth. But when my father convinced him that all he wanted was the foreskins of 100 Philistines for a marriage settlement, the poor innocent went for it, brought back 200 in fact, and claimed me. I was thrilled. My father was furious. He had come to hate David, and that hatred increased as David won more and more battles against the Philistines. In fact, when David was playing the harp for him one night, my father tried to run him through with a spear. He missed, and David fled. But my father sent his spies to watch David's house for his return so they could kill him. That night, though, he was with me in my room. I warned him about my father's spies and let him out my window so he could avoid the palace guards, and he vanished. I knew he would need time to make good his escape, and I figured out just the way to give it to him. I grabbed the household idol, tucked it into my bed, made a wig of goat hair for its head, and covered it with David's cloak. Then in the morning, when my father sent the spies up to my room to capture David, I stood in the doorway so they could see around me, but not get close enough to examine the bed. He's sick. He can't go down to my father, I told him, and shut the door. My father sent them right back up with instructions to pick up the bed with David still in it and bring him back with them so he could kill my David himself. Well, that finished that. My father was furious when the agents told him about my ruse, and he turned on me. I was terrified when he demanded, his eyes glittering and that spear in his hand, why I had betrayed him by helping his enemy escape. I lied. I told him David had threatened to kill me if I didn't help him. It was a lie. I didn't really need to tell. If I had just been brave and kept my head, I could have done what Jonathan did, told my father that David was no traitor, persuaded him to send for David, something. But I wasn't brave, and I think it was that betrayal really that ended my marriage to David, because that lie changed everything inside me. It poisoned me. I couldn't bear to see what I had really done, so I told myself and began to believe that my failure was really David's fault. If he had stayed and faced my father instead of abandoning me to his wrath and my fate, I wouldn't have had to lie, I told myself over and over. So I couldn't hear my conscience saying, "Coward, foolish girl, you've lost your heart's desire." Then my father married me off to Patel, the son of Lesh. He was a dear man. He was besotted about me as I had been about David, and he treated me as though I were High Queen, lavishing on me everything I could ever imagine wanting. Well, before I even thought of it, well, that's when the lie's poison finished its work. This is the way a woman of my rank should be treated, I told myself. And look at that peasant David, a filthy shepherd who abandons me to my father when I needed him the most. Just imagine what a marriage with him would really be like. I certainly wouldn't have all this, which was true enough. Patel spoiled me, treated me like a cross between a beloved child and a goddess, though never like a woman and his partner. He never held me responsible for my deeds, never checked my failings, even when they cost him shame and money. He couldn't bear to hurt me, he told me, when my conscience made me apologize to him occasionally and ask why he was so patient with me and never scolded me for my foolishness. But his refusal ever to find fault with me, even when I richly deserved it, did not teach me that I needed to grow up and take responsibility in this relationship if I wanted to be a wife worthy of the name. It only told me that I had done a good thing by betraying David, lying about him, and embracing this new husband who was treating me properly by letting me do anything I pleased, even shame him. So much did he fear to displease me and lose my love. It was a bad situation, and I never guessed how much harm Patel's kindness was doing us both. Then when Abner arrived demanding my return to David, I was hotly in my displeasure, angry at David, and terrified to face him, though I couldn't afford to see that then. Poor Patel, following us in tears until Abner sent him home. We got into Barum, I think, and then David never sent for me at all. I was furious. How dare he, that peasant, and so on. You know how that goes. Anyway, I sat with the rest of his women and simmered, and David finished his conquest of Israel. It was only when we were all in Jerusalem and David had decided to bring the ark of God into the city for blessing and protection that I finally confronted him and sealed my fate. I was looking out the window with the other wives, watching the ark being carried down the street. And there was David, wearing only a linen loincloth, leaping and dancing before the ark, in an ecstasy of love and joy, welcoming God into his city. Well, just the sight of him, vile, alive, beautiful, and so in love with God he shone, made me ache with a desire for him that scared me to death. It turned my carefully constructed world of lies upside down and inside out, and I couldn't stand it. I snatched at contempt and rage and hugged them to me, telling myself I was right to be angry because he was demeaning himself before everyone, not acting like a proper king, shaming me. I stormed down the stairs and waited. When finally he came to bless the household, I went out to meet him and said to him coldly, "Well, you certainly did a good job of shaming yourself today, exposing yourself to the gaze of the slave girls as any peasant might do." And I glared at him, waiting for an answer. He looked at me, startled, then seemed to look through me, right to the depths of my soul, where that first lie sat. His face grew sad, then stern as a carved rock. I'll never forget his words. "It was the Lord God I was dancing for, not them," he said softly. "And as the Lord God lives, the one who chose me to be leader of his people, Israel, instead of your father and his whole family, I shall shame myself even more and dance before him again." Then his eyes flashed and my anger died in their fire. "You may hold me in contempt," he said, grimacing as though he tasted gall, "but the slave girl before whom I've shamed myself by this dance will honor me." And he turned and started to walk away. That was all. It was enough. I saw my lie for the betrayal it was and named it so, knowing I could never be forgotten for it, could never possibly be loved by this man who, of all men, my heart desired and my soul cleaved to. And I saw that without his love, I might go on walking the earth, but I would be dead forever as me. I opened my mouth to say, I don't know what. It felt like a howl of misery, but it was too late. I could not call him back. So here I am, living in his harem, untouched, unloved, childless, longing for what I threw away in contempt, and knowing, certain as stone, that he will never touch me again, my dancing, lovely king. You can find that in the 1 Samuel chapters 14, verse 49, chapter 18, verses 20 through 29, chapter 19, verses 10 through 17, chapter 25, verse 44, in 2 Samuel, chapter 3, verses 13 through 16, chapter 6, verses 16 through 21 or 23, 1 Chronicles, chapter 15, verse 29. See Michael. See also David's serving girls. And that's it for the night, guys. We'll say the prayer again. And of course, we will be doing Jesus, the Son of Man, on the 1st of February. And then on the Super Bowl Sunday, we will be doing the Secrets to Deliverance, chapters 3 and 4. And let me get the, let's say the prayer, and then I'll get off. The Armor of God prayer. It's in Ephesians 6, but you can look it up on any search engine, folks. I put on and stand firm with the belt of truth buckled around my waist. I'm safe and secure with the breastplate of righteousness, guarding my heart from evil, helping me live a life that honors you. I diligently put on the gospel shoes of peace, willing to go wherever you ask of me. I take and stand behind the shield of faith, protected against Satan's fiery darts of doubt, fear, lies, and deceit. Now on my head I place the helmet of salvation, keeping my mind on you. I grab hold in my hand of the sword of the Spirit, the word of God, sharp and true. I'm prepared to live today in spiritual victory in Jesus' name. Amen, folks. Amen. Jane, what's your temperature out where you live? It's like very, very cold where I'm at. It is, let me see, 11 degrees. What's your temperature, Mary? Or Jane? Sorry, Mary. I know I already seen yours. But we'll get off after this. So, Jane, do you know what temperature you have out where you live? If not, that's okay. 1 degree. Oh, dang, Mary. Please stay warm. If you have any long underwear, and I mean long johns, put those on and get under some nice comfy bed, blankets and whatnot. But please be careful in that camper of yours. So I know that's probably not the best place for you. I wish Yeshua would find you a better place than that camper that you could live in. But y'all have a good night. Thank you for all watching. And I will see you next Sunday in the live stream where we will be doing Jesus, the Son of Man. Oh, awesome, Mary. That's good. I'll see you guys all next Sunday. Thank you and have a good night, folks. Stay warm out there. Love you all. May Yeshua bless you all. Thank you, Mary.